Thanks for hanging around with Weigh In this weekend. We've got a really good segment coming up now because for this week's Masara Report instalment, we're joined for the next quarter of an hour or so with one of the key guys, I suppose, in the consultant part of it, New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing's CEO, Bernard Saundry. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, gents.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So just...
The tie's a nice touch. We don't wear ties on the show, Bernard. So,
yeah, thanks for that, Mike.
You can tell the guys who get paid the serious money, Shelby. He's wearing the tie.
Wearing a tie.
CEO written all over that tie.
Yeah. Hey, just
next time I come in, I'll take it off for you.
Let's start with the most obvious question. What's happened since the report was unveiled at Claudelands by the Minister for Racing? Because I think, Bernard, a lot of people feel like this has happened and what's happened since, and I don't think many people know the answer to that.
And I think that's evolving, Michael. The Minister, 3 weeks ago, presented the report. John Masara lodged the report at the end of July. The Minister then came out and released the report in August and has said that he will appoint a racing industry transition agency. He's also asked for the industry to provide feedback. This is very much the Minister's process. The Racing Victoria, our board, New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, met on Wednesday and talked about each recommendation, very supportive of each recommendation. We know there's noise around land grabs and what venue should stay and what venue should go, but this is a game changer for the industry and we cannot waste this opportunity for a step change. And that's the message I'm getting from trainers, jockeys, owners, breeders, and we've got to get on the front foot.
There's going to be submissions to the Minister and to his staff. There's already 100 of those. There could well be 200, just a number off the top of our head, by October the 19th. I take it NZTR will be among those. Who do we think is going to be reading and analysing this enormous amount of data and suggestions and requests and then clarifying what we're going to do with it? Because, Bernard, to me it would seem to be an enormous job.
The DIA clearly and the Office of Racing will have a view on that and they'll read them, but ultimately it'll be the implementation of these recommendations need to be industry-led once the Minister has made the appropriate changes to the governance structure for racing across the three codes, the TAB. And the John Masara review gives us a roadmap and we need to embrace it. It's a framework and to deliver the benefits. And clearly the Minister made the comment when he launched the report that March, April next year will be the time for the legislation around race fields, around gaming tax, around point of consumption charges, and then the outsourcing of the TAB and the venue plan are other critical components. And there's been good work done already at the Racing Board, Project Desert Gold. There's been work done on the venue plan. John Masara's come in and had a view, which is fantastic. We've always said that we can't sustain 48 thoroughbred tracks in this country. And
it begs the question, and it probably steps back a wee bit from the report itself. How did we get here yet again? This seems to be a decade by decade problem for the racing industry. Every decade we get some money, we blow it, and then we get back here again. How are we possibly here again?
So I think the governance structure between the codes and the Racing Board is not clearly defined. And I've come out of a structure where thoroughbred racing was allowed to get on and run its own business, issue rate states, issue club funding. And I think politics has probably played too much of a role between clubs and NZRB in the past. NZRB do have the power today to tell a club you're not racing at that venue, but it's never been used appropriately.
That raises a really interesting question, and again, I'm not trying to be negative because I think a lot of people see anybody who questions how we're going to have change as somebody who says we don't want change, and everybody wants more money. And everybody realises tracks have to close. What I'm not sure about, and I think a lot of the clubs are questioning, is if my club doesn't get a licence and therefore we sell our racetrack, and Avondale is the most obvious one of those because it's worth the most, is it legal for racing as an industry to annex that money? Because I play rugby and we sold our rugby ground 10 years ago and the club kept the money. We didn't give it to the Auckland Rugby Union. So is it a firm legal standing that that money can be annexed for the greater good of the industry?
That's unclear at the moment in the legislation. So we've got a situation that clearly is unsustainable today, and we've got the Masara review. We'll get submissions from the clubs through this government process to find a way that when clubs do want to make investments, it's for the benefit of New Zealand thoroughbred racing. What we've seen too much of in the last, and I've only been here 14, 15 months, but I've seen lots of examples where there's been an acre or 2 acres sold off just to fund recurrent expenditure in a model that's unsustainable. So we've got clubs that, through the funding of the industry, prize money, when they say they engage with the community, some do it well, but the greater majority, the community does not support them.
I need to ask you this, and it's a devil's advocate question, but it's still true. If Avondale sold for $200 million, what has NZTR done in the last 10 years to suggest they're the right people to spend it?
Well, I can't look in the past, I can only look for the future, but I do know the collective assets of this industry. It's quite unique from anywhere in the world. There's probably $1 billion worth of land assets that thoroughbred tracks own and clubs own. Where do we try and get an answer that allows the industry to invest? Because at the moment, those assets aren't providing any benefit to New Zealand thoroughbred racing. So if we accept that, what is the answer?
Bernard,
I'm not going to pick on individual clubs or venues because it's an industry-wide issue that we need to address together. And that's why John Massaro's come out and made that recommendation. If that's not what it is, it's got to be something pretty close to demonstrate to the industry we need, big investments in tracks, we need big investments in customer facilities, training and education programs, and clubs are screaming for more money. So all of that says to me the model has to change substantially, and the 2 big assets that the industry has got, one is the assets that they own, and the other is our wagering asset. Now, we've got at the moment not enough people betting on New Zealand thoroughbred racing. There's the best return that we can get for New Zealand thoroughbred racing, which is my responsibility and the board's responsibility, is for a customer to bet on New Zealand thoroughbred racing. Gives us 6+ cents in the dollar return.
Bruce, you get?
Yeah, the key to the Massaro report appeared to be the setting up of RETA. Where are we at with that?
That's in the hands of the government at the moment, where we haven't been advised of the makeup, the timetable, the process. I would expect off the back of this consultation process, it finishes on the 19th of October, that the Minister will make some announcement. We've got to remember, we've got the government aligned to change. We've got the industry aligned to change. We've never had this better opportunity to make a step change to an industry that employs 55,000 people directly and indirectly, are responsible and are involved and rely on the 3 codes of racing in this country.
Do you think the whole 17 recommendations thing is making it a little bit confusing for people? Because some of these things I feel, and I think most people feel, should be implemented straight away. It would be lovely to get some tax duty relief, and obviously to get the race fields legislation money coming through, because closing racetracks is going to be a 5-year process, or that's what it's planned to be. And obviously the outsourcing of the TAB, if it happens, I think would be 18 months to 2 years. Do we need to start doing some of these things now rather than waiting to do them all together?
Well, I think that would be part of the RETA process. There'll be a timetable. What comes first? The legislation next year, the outsourcing, the track closures. You need a plan, an investment plan, and a process to do that.
So what can NZTR start doing without RETA? Like, what can we start to do now? Because otherwise, do we have to wait for RETA to be set up and all these reports to be read before anything happens?
Now, I would think that, judging on the Minister's feedback at the launch, that by March, April next year, we'll have legislation that will clarify a lot of the issues that were raised in the Massaro report. Race fields, we are screaming out for. As John Allen will say to you, it's $1 million a month that the 3 codes are missing out on. There's a point of consumption charge. There's the debate. I mean, I think it has to be a package that the Minister does go to the government with, because it makes a pretty big assumption around the wagering tax. There's $13.5 million left in the government that is recommended to come back to the industry. So we're keen to make sure that package is done and the process is followed to deliver the game-changing recommendations in that report for prize money and for the longevity of our participants.
So you've probably been reading a lot of books about breathing in the last month or so, because there's questions firing everywhere. We went out into the field yesterday at Riccarton and got a couple of questions off the ground from people who are at the coalface, if you like.
Pam Hughes, Christchurch, a trainer at Riccarton. I'd like to ask you, Bernard, what sort of time frame you are envisaging for the implementation of the Massaro report?
So I think we touched on that earlier. I think you'll see changes to legislation in March, April next year. Race fields commence in the 1920 season. The point of consumption charge to be clarified. I want to see the first rollout of the venue plan. We want to see first synthetic track installed, starting being built in March, April next year. And we need to roll. We can't wait another 12 months. It is time for change. It is time for action. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is fixable with the basis of the recommendations out of the Massara report. And we need unity in the industry. Everyone's got a view. You go to a race meeting and stand on a running rail, and everyone will have a different view from I don't like Massara to let's fully adopt it.
Yep.
And it's time to make a call. It is time for racing to step up, support the government in its initiatives, and get on with it.
So Pam Hughes, obviously a leading trainer with husband Kevin at Riccarton. Let's hear from someone who's an owner, a young fella who's got a share in several horses, see what he had to ask.
G'day Bernie, my name's Steve Ridley here. I'm a racing enthusiast. My question for you is how come so many people at the top end of the market at New Zealand thoroughbred racing are on $100,000 salaries when the guys at the coalface who provide the sport are struggling? The cost of racing keeps going up, but yet the stakes increase is going about as good as the horses are back today. How are we going to improve this to attract more people to the game in the future?
So it's a good question, Steve. There's no doubt we need a more efficient model. I'm not going to get into the debate about who gets paid and what. We won't get the right outcomes if we focus on that. Well, we want Steve to be engaged in the sport for the next 20 years, and the Massara report with those recommendations will build a sustainable future.
So to simplify that, if you said minimum stakes from Ruakaka to Riverton in 2020 are going to be $20,000,
yep.
How would that manifest itself? What would happen? How could that come about? Could it come about?
It can come about, and it needs the government to adopt the racefields legislation, the point of consumption charge. We start the process of the outsourcing of the TAB on the basis that it's a right commercial deal. Right. That needs to be put to tender. But yeah, it's the new revenue streams that can be generated through the money through punters betting on New Zealand racing in Australia, for example.
On the side of that conversation, he said, "Why don't you pay back to last?" If my horse turns up at the races at Riccarton yesterday, it's a rating 65. It's providing income for the club. The only person who's not getting paid is actually the owner of the horse. The jockey gets paid, the person that brings the horse to the float gets paid, the club gets paid because I've lined my horse up. Every single horse there yesterday at Riccarton was bet on. Why don't you pay back to last? At least something.
And I support that. So in the next tranche...
That's been a philosophy with the New Zealand thoroughbred racing industry that has been thrown out by the trainers in the past. We don't get our 5% of those, so it's not happening.
Well, the model we had, I can only use where I've worked in Victoria, where you can pay down to 10th. There can be a starter subsidy paid or a percentage of the prize money from right through, but that can only happen when you do get an uplift in prize money. We've got, and it's a frustration between the participants and ZTR, the amount of transactions in acceptance fees, entry fees, riders fees. It's a money go round in the industry that can be tidied up very simply, and we will deliver that off the back of these changes.
Why are broadcasting rights actually on the table?
This is Desert Gold. We read it in the paper this week, didn't we, The Informant? What can you tell us about that?
So Desert Gold is a working party that was established with the Racing Board and the 3 codes to investigate the outsourcing. And there was some soft market testing done. And I would think that once the Racing Board is restructured, the new governance model and whatever RETA looks like, the work's there to... I mean, there's a third of the work already been done. We need to go and test the market in a formal tender process.
Sounds like there's a lot of work being done on a number of areas. Absolutely. Where it's just a matter of getting the all clear to proceed.
That's it. And we've got the venue, the 3 codes and the Racing Board, and a lot of good work around venue planning, a lot of good work around outsourcing. And we've got to remember, next year, which is your point, Sheldon, we've got 2 important contracts. We've got a broadcasting contract for the industry that's up in April next year, and we've got a wagering contract that's up in October next year.
That raises 2 questions. And I know you can't speak to this because it's commercially sensitive and you signed a non-disclosure agreement, but there were 2 major players who I know, we've mentioned on the show already, made offers that this is what we would be willing to pay. Are they soft offers which are part of a framework working forward to outsource the Racing Board, or does the whole process start again? Because if you've had this consultation with overseas operators, and the obvious ones are Tabcorp's an obvious one. We know that's going to be one of them. Is that framework usable going forward, or do we scrap the entire thing? Because are those negotiations and those offers and those numbers, which you can't mention, but they're in the public domain, are they numbers we expect to see go up or even be part of a conversation, or do you start from zero?
No, I think the work that's been done, we just need to take the next step on it to test the market.
Okay, so if somebody said there's a number of $100 million for 25 years is what we're willing to pay for the licence, that's not return to the industry, that's what we're willing to pay for the betting licence. If somebody says that, do you go back to them and say, that's not enough? If that's the number, because you can't disclose that, we want 150 or 200 million. Is that possible, or are they saying, nah, that's what we're going to pay?
Well, in any commercial negotiation, you'd want to put some tension in the market. You'd want to have a proper tender process where parties do submit proposals that, and there's got to be a clear step change in the financial benefit for the New Zealand industry, thoroughbreds, harness and greyhounds. So that's why we went into it. There's been some soft market testing done. The next step is to go to a formal tender process for operators, whether it's in Australia or out of the UK, to demonstrate how they can improve the financial viability and commercial arrangements for all the industry in New Zealand.
Would NZTR, whether it's in this sort of format on a platform like this or on a digital platform, like to have a thoroughbred-only channel?
So I've made it pretty clear I want a digital stream of the thoroughbred on our platform, the New Zealand
like racing.com.
Yeah, online, the digital, right? We want to be able to stream it because we know the TAB do a great job race to race, and the objective of having that churn factor, a race going off every 2 minutes. There's a large segment of punters that like that, punting from race to race, whether it's New Zealand racing, Sydney racing, Melbourne, Adelaide. So that program is required and needed, which is what we do here. But then in a digital sense, I'd like to see our racing streamed to our digital platform for people to enjoy, see our heroes, see our trainers, our jockeys.
What wasn't enjoyable, we've only got about 30 seconds of trackside's coverage of, say, Hastings yesterday. 2 channels, wall-to-wall coverage of the New Zealand racing, and then we had to watch poor us Caulfield and Flemington. That is the New Zealand racing television is at the top end. There is no nothing superior.
That's, and I compliment. So yesterday was a fantastic coverage.
So you just keep that rolling, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Absolutely you do.
Okay, that was probably us for about time. I suppose many thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having
me. If you can be transparent and I guess accountable and forthcoming with the Masara report, which is required in this day and age, it'll be great to have you back on again.
That's what we need to do because this is a moment in time where the industry has to get the result. It can't. There is no option. So there's no plan B.
Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us on the way in, and until next week when we may have the John Allen angle on the Masara report, among other things, including Greys racing at Avondale. Mā te wā.